Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington stood silently as the corrupt police chief was escorted into federal custody. The chief glared with hatred, never imagining the routine traffic stop 3 months ago would dismantle his entire criminal empire. The black man he had targeted was actually the deadliest tactical mind in modern warfare. Before we dive into this incredible story of justice and redemption, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe in karma, and subscribe to join our storytelling community for more powerful true stories. Now let's rewind to see exactly how this corrupt police chief's empire came crashing down. The evening sun cast long shadows across the Louisiana backroads as Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington drove his modest sedan through Bayou Ridge. At 52, the highly decorated former Special Forces commander carried himself with the quiet dignity earned through 30 years of military service. Today had been particularly difficult, the 5th anniversary of his wife's passing. He'd spent hours at her grave talking to her, as he always did, updating her on his retirement and the consulting work that kept his tactical mind sharp. The road stretched empty before him as Elijah noticed flashing lights in his rearview mirror. He checked his speedometer, exactly 5 miles under the limit, as was his habit. With the practiced calm of a man who had faced far worse than traffic stops, he pulled to the shoulder, keeping his hands visible on the steering wheel. 2 officers approached, one on each side of his vehicle. Even before they spoke, Elijah sensed trouble in their posture, in the way their hands rested too eagerly on their weapons. "License and registration," barked the officer at his window. Officer Darren Reynolds, according to his nameplate. His partner, Officer Blake Miller, was already shining a flashlight through the passenger window with unnecessary intensity. "May I ask what I'm being pulled over for, Officer?" Elijah inquired politely. Reynolds' face hardened. "You were swerving. You've been drinking tonight, boy." The use of boy, that deliberate diminishment, told Elijah everything he needed to know about this encounter. "No, sir. I don't drink. I'm just returning from the cemetery visiting my late wife." Elijah's voice remained steady as he slowly reached for his wallet. "I said, license and registration." Reynolds repeated louder, his hand now resting on his holstered weapon. Elijah complied, handing over his identification. As Reynolds examined it, his expression changed subtly, perhaps noting Elijah's military ID alongside his driver's license. "Step out of the vehicle," Reynolds commanded. Elijah complied, moving with deliberate slowness. "Is there a problem, officer? We received reports of drug trafficking along this road. Mind if we take a look in your car?" Without waiting for an answer, Officer Miller was already opening the passenger door. "I don't consent to a search," Elijah stated firmly. Reynolds stepped closer, invading Elijah's personal space. "Listen here. We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Elijah noticed the dashboard camera's indicator light was off, not recording. As Miller rummaged through his car, Elijah maintained his composure, watching, observing, analyzing, just as he had done in countless operations across 4 continents. His mind cataloged every detail: the officers' body language, their coordination, the practiced nature of their actions. This wasn't random harassment. This was procedure, a system. Miller emerged from the car holding a small bag that Elijah knew with absolute certainty hadn't been there before. Well, what do we have here?" Miller said with exaggerated surprise. "Looks like we got ourselves a drug dealer." Reynolds smirked, stepping even closer to Elijah. "That's not mine," Elijah stated calmly. "You know it and I know it." The blow came suddenly, Reynolds' fist connecting with Elijah's stomach, doubling him over. "You calling me a liar, boy?" Reynolds hissed, grabbing Elijah's collar. "I've taken down warlords who thought they were untouchable." Elijah thought, but remained silent already, calculating, planning. This wasn't the battlefield, but his mind was shifting into the same tactical space. "Here's how this works." Reynolds continued, his voice lower now. "You're in a lot of trouble. Possession resisting arrest. That's years behind bars. But maybe we can work something out." Elijah straightened up slowly. "What kind of arrangement?" he asked, already knowing the answer. "Protection money, $2,000, and this all goes away. 1 week. Meet us right here, same time." Reynolds smiled, revealing teeth as predatory as his intentions. Otherwise, next time we won't be so understanding." Elijah nodded, perhaps a bit too quickly. "I understand. 1 week." Something in his easy acquiescence gave Reynolds pause. The officer studied him for a moment, perhaps sensing something wasn't quite right with this particular victim. But the moment passed. "Get back in your car and get out of here. Remember, 1 week." As Elijah drove away, his military mind was already processing everything he'd witnessed. In his 30 years commanding special operations, he had dismantled terrorist cells, drug cartels, and human trafficking networks. He had developed an unparalleled ability to identify organizational structures, pinpoint vulnerabilities, and strategically apply pressure until entire systems collapsed. These officers had just made the gravest mistake of their careers. They had selected as their target a man who specialized in destroying corrupt power structures. The consummate strategist was already planning their downfall, mapping out the chess moves that would lead to their inevitable defeat. They thought they'd found an easy mark. Instead, they'd stumbled upon the most dangerous kind of enemy, one with nothing to lose: the skills to dismantle their entire operation, and the patience to do it methodically, completely, and without mercy. The next morning found Elijah sitting in a rented car half a mile from the Bayou Ridge Police Department, a pair of high-powered binoculars resting in his lap. Old habits from his intelligence-gathering days had quickly resurfaced. For 3 decades he had commanded covert operations that began exactly this way: quiet observation, pattern recognition, identifying the organizational structure before engaging the enemy. The small-town police department would prove no different from the terrorist cells and criminal organizations he had dismantled across the globe. Over the following days, Elijah methodically built his intelligence picture. He tracked Officer Reynolds through his daily routines, noting his meetings with other officers in parking lots and diners rather than at the station. He observed cash-changing hands, watched as Reynolds met regularly with Officer Miller and 3 other patrolmen who seemed to operate as a unit. Most importantly, he documented their patrol patterns, focusing on how they specifically targeted vehicles driven by people of color on that particular stretch of highway. By the 4th day, Elijah had identified the command structure. Chief Victor Hargrove was clearly the head of the operation, SUV. A man who lived in a home far too luxurious for his official salary, drove an $80,000 SUV, and wore watches worth more than many of his officers made in a prosent month. The pattern was clear. The officers pulled over minorities on fabricated charges, planted evidence if necessary, then offered them the choice between extortionate protection money or false imprisonment. Those who couldn't pay disappeared into the system. Just like extortion rackets in Eastern Europe, Elijah muttered to himself as he compiled his notes. He needed more information from the victim's perspective. The Sweet Magnolia Diner sat just off the highway, its windows foggy with the steam of coffee and home-style cooking. Elijah had chosen it for its strategic location, close enough to observe the police station but public enough to provide safety. "Coffee black," he ordered, settling into a booth with a clear view of both the entrance and the back exit. "You're new around here," the waitress observed as she poured his coffee. Her name tag read, Amara. "Just passing through," Elijah replied with a practiced smile that revealed nothing, "though I seem to have caught the attention of your local police." Amara's hand stilled momentarily, coffee pot hovering above his cup. "That's so," her voice had cooled considerably. "Let me guess." Out on County Road, 12 officers, Reynolds and Miller. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "You're familiar with their work." "My brother Marcus is doing 5 years because of them," she said quietly, looking around before sliding into the seat across from him. "He couldn't pay their fine. Claimed they found drugs in his car. Same story, different day." Over the next hour, as the diner emptied, Amara introduced Elijah to other victims who worked at or frequented the establishment: a cook whose son was serving time, a dishwasher who'd paid $3,000 to avoid arrest, a regular customer who'd lost his business paying repeated fines. Each story followed the same pattern, painting a picture of systematic racial extortion that had been operating unchecked for years. "Nobody believes us," Amara explained. "The chief is connected to Judge Harrison, who dismisses any complaints. The prosecutor, D.A. Williams, is Hargrove's brother-in-law. The whole system is rigged. Elijah nodded, recording their testimonies on his phone with their permission. And nobody from outside investigates FBI agent came through last year, the cook said bitterly. Next thing we know, he's golfing with the chief, and nothing changes. Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Elijah left the diner with a comprehensive understanding of what he was facing, not just corrupt officers, but an entire system built on racial profiling and extortion protected by connections that reached into federal law enforcement. As he drove past Chief Hargrove's sprawling colonial home that evening, noting the security cameras and the manicured lawn, Elijah allowed himself a small, grim smile. He had dismantled warlords with private armies, toppled dictators surrounded by security forces. A corrupt small-town police chief, no matter how well connected, was still just a man abusing his power. And if there was one thing Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington excelled at, it was bringing such men to justice. Back in his hotel room, Elijah made a call to a number few people in the world possessed. "Darius," he said, when the line connected, "I need your help with a situation." Master Sergeant Darius Coleman, Elijah's former second-in-command through 15 years of special operations, listened without interruption as Elijah outlined what he'd discovered. "I'll be there tomorrow," was all Darius said before hanging up. The pieces were coming together. The enemy had been identified. Now it was time to plan the campaign that would bring down not just Officer Reynolds, but the entire corrupt system he represented. As Elijah laid out his evidence on the hotel room wall, mapping connections with the precision of a military operation, he thought of all those unjustly imprisoned, of lives destroyed by systemic racism, weaponized through badges and guns. This wasn't just about his own encounter anymore. This was about justice on a scale these corrupt officers couldn't begin to imagine. By the time Darius arrived the next day, Elijah had already secured a small cabin on the outskirts of town, remote enough to avoid surveillance, yet close enough to maintain operational effectiveness. The cabin's living room walls were covered with photos, notes, and connections mapped with military precision. "Just like Damascus," Darius commented, as he entered, referencing one of their most complex operations. Tall and broad-shouldered, with a shaved head and watchful eyes, Darius carried himself with the same controlled power as his former commander. "Worse," Elijah replied. "In Damascus, we knew who the enemy was. Here they wear badges and claim to protect the community. Together they expanded the intelligence picture. Darius brought military-grade surveillance equipment that civilian law enforcement wouldn't recognize. Within days, they had mapped every corrupt officer's routine, identified weaknesses, and plotted potential pressure points. Chief Hargrove is the key," Elijah explained, tapping the man's photo at the center of their wall chart. "But he's insulated. 3 layers of protection, corrupt officers, the judge, the prosecutor. We need to create fractures in their unity before we can get to him." Elijah recalled a similar operation he'd led years earlier against an Eastern European trafficking network. "Remember Belgrade, how we turned the lieutenants against each other?" Darius nodded, a smile spreading across his face. Divide and conquer. Classic Washington strategy. Their plan took shape with military precision. First, gather irrefutable evidence. Second, create division among the corrupt officers. Third, exploit those divisions to dismantle the network from within. "We need someone on the inside," Darius noted, studying the organizational chart they'd created. "Not everyone in that department can be corrupt." The town meeting provided their opportunity. Held in the community center, it was ostensibly about local development, but Chief Hargrove dominated the proceedings, his presence commanding deference from town officials. From the back of the room, Elijah observed the dynamics, noting who spoke, who remained silent, and most importantly, who seemed uncomfortable with the chief's authority. Deputy Sarah Martinez caught his attention immediately. Young, likely in her early 30s, she stood apart from the other officers, her body language suggesting discomfort rather than respect when the chief spoke. When a community member raised concerns about increased police presence in predominantly black neighborhoods, Martinez's eyes dropped to the floor, while her colleagues bristled defensively. "Target acquired," Elijah whispered to Darius. After the meeting, as they walked to their car, Elijah felt eyes on him. A quick practice scan revealed Officer Miller sitting in an unmarked police car across the street, watching them intently. "We've been made," Darius murmured. "Good," Elijah replied. "Let them think they're in control. It'll make them overconfident." Back at the cabin, they refined their approach. "Deputy Martinez is key," Elijah explained. "She's uncomfortable with what's happening but afraid to act. We give her evidence she can't ignore, make her our inside person." Darius raised an eyebrow. "And if she's loyal to Hargrove, then we use that loyalty against him. Either way, she becomes a vector for division. Do you believe in justice even when the system fails? If you think everyone deserves fair treatment regardless of race, comment number 1 below. Like this video if you've ever witnessed discrimination and wished you could do something about it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage against corruption. Now, what would you do if you were Elijah facing a corrupt system with no one to trust? Would you fight back or walk away? The payment day arrived right on schedule. Elijah drove to the designated meeting spot, his car now equipped with hidden cameras and microphones, so advanced they could capture whispers from 20 feet away. But Officers Reynolds and Miller had other plans. "Change of location," Reynolds announced, directing Elijah to follow them. The officers led him to an abandoned warehouse outside town limits, a clear escalation and a warning sign. Inside, 3 additional officers waited, creating a 5-to-1 advantage they clearly intended to intimidate him with. Elijah recognized them all from his intelligence gathering. 2,000 seems a bit light for the trouble you're in," Reynolds said, circling Elijah like a predator. "We've been looking into you, Mr. Washington. Military man retired with a nice pension. I think you can afford to be more generous." Elijah allowed a flicker of fear to cross his face, a calculated display of vulnerability. "I brought what we agreed on," he stammered perfectly, playing the role of an intimidated victim. "How much more do you want?" The conversation unfolded, exactly as Elijah had anticipated. The demands increased, the threats became more explicit, and most importantly, the officers revealed more about their operation than they realized. Elijah strategically dropped comments about other potential victims: a wealthy doctor visiting family, a businessman passing through next week, noting which officers reacted with interest. When Reynolds grew frustrated with Elijah's apparent reluctance, the first blow came, a calculated strike to his midsection. Elijah absorbed the impact, purposely dropping to one knee while secretly activating the secondary recording devices. He could have disabled Reynolds in 17 different ways, techniques he'd perfected in combat zones across 3 continents, but that wasn't the mission. Not yet. The warehouse door opened, revealing Chief Hargrove himself, immaculately dressed in civilian clothes. "Problem here, gentlemen?" he asked, his voice smooth as polished stone. The officers straightened immediately. Reynolds yanked Elijah to his feet. "Just explaining the rules to our new friend, Chief." Hargrove approached Elijah, studying him with cold calculation. "Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington," he said, surprising Elijah momentarily. 30 years military service, special forces, quite the resume. He circled Elijah, maintaining a careful distance. "You understand how things work here now, don't you, Colonel? This is our town, our rules." The chief named a figure, $10,000, and a deadline of 1 week. "Otherwise we find those drugs again, maybe something worse. Career military man like you. Federal charges would mean losing that pension, wouldn't it?" Elijah nodded, projecting defeated acceptance, while inwardly marking Hargrove for destruction. The chief's personal involvement was the final confirmation he needed. This wasn't rogue officers. This was systematic corruption from the top down. After they released him, Elijah drove directly to the post office, where he mailed an anonymous package to Deputy Martinez containing selected evidence of Reynolds' extortion activities. Phase 1 was now active. The next morning, from their surveillance position, Elijah and Darius watched Martinez confront Reynolds in the station parking lot. Her body language clearly agitated his defensive and then threatening. The first crack had appeared. Within hours, Reynolds was on the phone to Chief Hargrove, whose irritation was visible even from a distance. "The division begins," Elijah noted with satisfaction as they observed the chief berating Reynolds. That evening, they placed surveillance devices near the homes of key officers, capturing incriminating conversations as the corrupt network began discussing their problem. Somebody was causing trouble. Evidence was appearing, accusations. We're flying. Exactly as planned, suspicion was taking root. Trust was eroding. And Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington, the man they'd targeted as an easy victim, was just getting started. A week passed with Elijah and Darius systematically planting seeds of discord throughout the department. Anonymous tips to honest officers, strategic information leaks, carefully edited audio recordings delivered to different corrupt officers, each suggesting others were informing. The once unified corruption network was showing its first fractures, with Reynolds and Miller now openly hostile to each other, each suspecting the other of compromising their operation. Elijah's deadline for the $10,000 payment arrived on a rain-soaked Tuesday evening. This time, he came prepared not just with recording devices, but with a comprehensive understanding of the warehouse layout, multiple exit strategies, and a clear tactical objective: escalate the situation enough to gather conclusive evidence without revealing his true capabilities. The same 5 officers awaited him, tension visible in their postures. Reynolds appeared nervous, his usual swagger diminished. Miller stood apart, no longer the loyal partner. The others positioned themselves strategically around the space hands, never far from their weapons. "You're late," Reynolds snapped, as Elijah entered, rainwater dripping from his coat. "Traffic," Elijah replied, simply setting down a gym bag that presumably contained the money. Chief Hargrove emerged from the shadows at the back of the warehouse, his expensive shoes incongruous against the dirty concrete floor. "Open it," he commanded. Elijah complied, unzipping the bag to reveal stacks of cash. Hargrove nodded to one of the officers, who began counting. "While we verify your contribution," Hargrove said smoothly, "perhaps we should discuss our ongoing arrangement." He circled Elijah like a shark scenting blood. "This isn't a one-time payment, Colonel. Think of it as an insurance policy that needs regular renewal." Elijah projected the right mix of resignation and fear. "How regular? Monthly seems fair," Hargrove replied. "Same amount. Consider it your local tax for driving through our jurisdiction without inconvenience." The counting officer looked up. "It's all here, Chief." Hargrove smiled thinly. "Excellent. See, Colonel, cooperation makes everything so much easier." The moment was perfect for Elijah's first subtle counterattack. "I notice Officer Miller seems concerned," he said quietly, nodding toward the visibly uncomfortable officer. "Something wrong with our arrangement?" The question landed exactly as intended. Hargrove's head snapped toward Miller, suspicion flaring in his eyes. "Officer Miller knows his place," Hargrove said coldly. "Don't you, Miller?" Miller straightened, his discomfort now obvious to everyone. "Yes, sir. No problems here." But the seed was planted. Elijah continued his psychological operation, dropping seemingly innocent comments that heightened the existing tensions. He mentioned hearing rumors about internal investigations, watching as Reynolds and another officer exchanged worried glances. He asked if everyone gets their fair share, noting how Hargrove's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. When Reynolds became agitated and struck Elijah again, he allowed himself to fall against Miller, whispering, "They're watching all of you," in a voice only Miller could hear. The effect was immediate. Miller stepped back as if burned, his eyes darting nervously to the warehouse windows. As the meeting concluded, Hargrove established the next payment date and location, unaware that each word further incriminated him on Elijah's hidden devices. The chief departed first, followed by his officers, leaving Elijah alone in the warehouse, exactly as planned. The moment they were gone, Elijah retrieved the secondary recording devices hidden during the confrontation and transmitted the evidence to Darius, who was positioned nearby. That night, Deputy Martinez found a flash drive containing select portions of the warehouse recording on the seat of her locked car, an impossibility that would unnerve her as much as the evidence itself. The recording specifically highlighted Reynolds threatening her career and Hargrove discussing how to handle problematic officers who might not be fully committed to the program. The next morning, surveillance confirmed the impact of their operation. Martinez confronted Reynolds in the station parking lot, their heated exchange visible even from Elijah and Darius's distant position. When Reynolds grabbed her arm, she pulled away and stormed into the station. Within an hour, Reynolds was summoned to Hargrove's office, emerging 30 minutes later looking shaken. By afternoon, the department was buzzing with tension. Officers who normally patrolled together were requesting separate assignments. Hargrove was making phone calls from his car rather than his office. The system was beginning to fracture exactly as Elijah had designed. Phase 1 complete, Elijah noted that evening, updating their operation wall. The unified front is breaking down. They're beginning to suspect each other. Darius nodded, his expression grim but satisfied. When do we move to Phase 2? When they start making mistakes, Elijah replied, studying the surveillance photos. And that's already happening. Reynolds is nervous, drinking more, talking too much. Miller is scared, looking for a way out. The chief is getting paranoid. He pointed to a new photo of Hargrove checking under his car for tracking devices. And Deputy Martinez is our wild card. He's gathering courage, asking questions, accessing files she shouldn't. Elijah smiled thinly. In my experience, corrupt systems collapse from within, once trust is broken. All we need to do now is keep applying pressure at the right points. That pressure came in the form of more evidence strategically delivered to various officers, more whispered rumors, and more public exposure. Anonymous tips led to legitimate state police conducting traffic stops in Hargrove's jurisdiction, interrupting their extortion operations. Carefully edited recordings suggested informants in their midst. Within days, the once cohesive corruption was devolving into infighting, suspicion, and fear, emotions that Elijah knew from long experience would inevitably lead to critical mistakes. The trap was set. The targets were in motion. And Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington, the tactical genius they had foolishly victimized, watched with the patient certainty of a predator who knew his prey was already defeated, even as they continued to believe themselves the hunters rather than the hunted. Chief Hargrove wasn't a man who had risen to power without instincts. By the end of the week, he sensed the coordinated nature of the disruptions affecting his operation. "We're being targeted," he announced to his inner circle, gathered in the soundproofed conference room of the Bayou Ridge Police Department. "Someone is systematically coming after us, and I want to know who." His response was swift and brutal. Patrols were doubled in black neighborhoods. Vehicle stops increased threefold. A clear message was being sent. The system was reasserting control. When Elijah returned to his cabin after meeting with Amara Johnson to gather more victim testimonies, he immediately sensed the disturbance. The door was locked just as he'd left it, but the nearly invisible filament he'd placed across the threshold was broken. Inside the cabin appeared untouched to an untrained eye, but Elijah noted the subtle signs of a professional search. Cushions, sitting a quarter-inch higher, books aligned too perfectly. The laptop screen angled 3 degrees differently. "They've made their move," he told Darius when his partner returned. "Fortunately, they found exactly what I wanted them to find." The decoy evidence Elijah had left, suggesting he was merely gathering information for a possible civil rights lawsuit, would give Hargrove a false sense of understanding. The real evidence, the comprehensive intelligence they'd gathered, remained secure in encrypted cloud storage and backup drives hidden where no searcher would think to look. The chief's counterattack escalated the following day when Amara Johnson was arrested while opening the diner for breakfast. The charges, drug possession with intent to distribute, were transparently fabricated, but in Hargrove's jurisdiction that hardly mattered. The message was clear: cooperate with the outsider and face consequences. Elijah had anticipated this move. When he visited Amara in the county jail, presenting himself as a concerned friend, the guards subjected him to extra scrutiny, but found nothing suspicious. They couldn't detect the advanced recording device he passed to Amara during a brief embrace or the whispered instructions for using it to document any threats or coercion from inside. "They're trying to get to me through you," he told her quietly. "But this is all part of bringing them down. Stay strong. Document everything." The corrupt officer's focus on Elijah intensified. His hotel room was searched. His rental car was impounded on fabricated violations. When these pressures failed to deter him, they escalated to physical intimidation. The accident was staged with professional precision. a truck forcing his car off the road at a curve with poor sightlines. No witnesses, and a 50-foot drop into the bayou below. Only Elijah's exceptional defensive driving skills, honed evading IEDs and ambushes in combat zones, allowed him to maintain control of his vehicle, deliberately steering into a shallow ditch rather than the deadly drop the truck driver had intended. As he crawled from the wreckage, cataloging the bruises and minor cuts while noting the truck's disappearance around the bend, Elijah didn't feel fear. He felt confirmation. They were desperate, which meant his strategy was working. The next day brought the most direct attack yet. Darius was detained while conducting surveillance, beaten under the pretext of resisting arrest and held incommunicado for 24 hours. When finally released, his injuries told the story. His words didn't need to cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder contusions across his torso and face. They wanted information, Darius reported, wincing, as Elijah helped treat his wounds. Kept asking what we're really doing here, who we're working for. Think they believe we're federal. Elijah nodded grimly. They're escalating faster than anticipated. We need to accelerate our timeline. His military contacts had finally responded, connecting him with honest agents in the State Bureau of Investigation. But the local FBI field office remained a problem. Preliminary inquiries confirmed Hargrove's connections there ran deep. The chief was moving aggressively to control the narrative. A press conference portrayed Elijah as a dangerous agitator with potential mental health issues stemming from PTSD, a threat to community safety, who was harassing hard-working police officers with baseless accusations. Local media, either complicit or intimidated, repeated these claims without investigation. Monitoring social media, Elijah and Darius watched as community opinion was manipulated against them, with planted comments questioning their motives and suggesting outside agitators were causing trouble in peaceful Bayou Ridge. The web of corruption proved even more extensive than initially assessed. Financial records Darius had obtained through back channels revealed Hargrove's connections to property developers, construction companies, and private prison contractors. The racial profiling and extortion weren't just for personal enrichment and they were feeding a larger system of exploitation that permeated the county's power structure. As Elijah studied these connections, adding them to their intelligence wall, the chief's desperate response made perfect sense. This wasn't just about corrupt cops. It was about an entire economic ecosystem built on systematic racism and exploitation. The stakes had risen exponentially, and so had the danger. He's ordered them to neutralize the threat, Darius reported after monitoring police band communications. Direct quote. Use any means necessary. Elijah absorbed this information with the calm of a commander who had faced death threats across 4 continents. Then we match their escalation, he decided, turning to their contingency plans. Activate Protocol Chimera. It was a reference Darius understood immediately. A strategy they'd developed for situations where conventional approaches had failed, named after the mythological fire-breathing monster. In practical terms, it meant psychological warfare at its most sophisticated. Within hours, they began implementing techniques Elijah had refined against hardened terrorists and warlords, to anonymous messages to different officers, suggesting others were informing fake evidence of betrayal planted where certain officers would find it, rumors of immunity deals being offered to the first officer willing to talk. Combined with the genuine evidence, they continued to gather and strategically deploy these tactics, targeted the corruption network's greatest vulnerability: trust. As Chief Hargrove gathered his loyal officers and issued increasingly frantic orders to find and silence Elijah Washington, he remained unaware that the legendary commander had faced far more dangerous opponents than a corrupt, small-town police chief. Elijah had dismantled terrorist networks and drug cartels that commanded armies and territories. He had outthought military strategists trained at the world's most elite academies. And now, with the clarity of righteous purpose, he was bringing all those skills to bear on a system that had terrorized innocent citizens for too long. The trap wasn't just closing, it was about to spring shut with devastating precision. The morning news bulletin hit Bayou Ridge like a thunderclap. The regional television station led with explosive footage of Officer Darren Reynolds using racial slurs and excessive force during multiple traffic stops. The videos edited to protect victims' identities, but unflinching in showing Reynolds' behavior had been anonymously submitted, along with documentation, suggesting a pattern of racial targeting. The station, based in a larger city 50 miles away and beyond local influence, had vetted the material with legal experts before broadcasting. By noon, social media was ablaze. By evening, small but vocal protests had formed outside the Bayou Ridge Police Department. Chief Hargrove called an emergency press conference, placing Reynolds on administrative leave pending investigation, a transparent attempt to contain the damage that fooled no one. Elijah watched from his new safe house, having abandoned the compromised cabin for a location even Darius didn't know. "Divide and isolate," he murmured, studying the chief's body language on the screen. Classic counterinsurgency. The strategic release of evidence targeting Reynolds specifically was meticulously calculated. As the most openly racist officer with the most documented abuses, Reynolds made the perfect sacrifice for Hargrove to offer in hopes of preserving the broader system. But Elijah had anticipated this move, preparing the next phase of division before Hargrove had even finished his press conference. Officer Miller received an anonymous text containing partial transcripts of a conversation, purportedly between Reynolds and state investigators, suggesting he was cooperating to save himself by implicating others. The transcript was largely fabricated but contained enough verifiable details about their operations to seem authentic. Similar messages reached other corrupt officers, each customized to exploit existing tensions and suspicions. Chief Hargrove's phone rang at 3 a.m, a spoofed call appearing to come from his prosecutor brother-in-law, warning him that subpoenas were being prepared. No such subpoenas existed yet, but the call achieved its purpose by sunrise. The chief was paranoid, trusting fewer officers, isolating himself from potential threats. The division strategy accelerated when Deputy Martinez found a sealed envelope in her locker containing photos of Reynolds and Miller conducting an illegal search, planting evidence, and extorting money. The envelope also contained a note. "Not everyone with a badge is corrupt. Some still protect and serve. What will you do?" Martinez's decision came faster than Elijah had anticipated. That afternoon, she requested a private meeting with Chief Hargrove, carrying a case file under her arm. Elijah and Darius monitored the meeting through surveillance equipment they'd previously planted. "She's wearing a wire," Darius observed with surprise, as their directional microphones picked up the faint electronic signature of recording equipment. Smart woman, protecting herself. The meeting revealed Martinez had been conducting her own investigation for months, gathering evidence while maintaining her cover. She presented Hargrove with a choice: internal reform or external exposure. The chief's response was predictably threatening, revealing even more about the extent of corruption, while believing he was intimidating her into silence. Instead, he was providing precise evidence of his leadership role in the criminal enterprise. "She's either very brave or very foolish," Darius commented, as Martinez left the station visibly shaken but resolute. "She just became our most valuable asset," Elijah replied, "and Hargrove's biggest threat." The corrupt network was now making critical mistakes. Officers who once operated in disciplined coordination were acting independently, suspicious of each other, focused on self-preservation. Elijah exploited these fractures, masterfully planting evidence, suggesting the chief's second-in-command was skimming money, triggering an internal investigation that further divided their attention and resources. Meanwhile, Darius had established contact with honest state police officers who operated outside Hargrove's influence. Their interest was professional but cautious. Corruption allegations against police required extraordinary evidence. Fortunately, extraordinary evidence was precisely what Elijah excelled at gathering. What would you do if you witnessed injustice in your community? Comment number 1. If you'd stand up against corruption like Elijah, even when facing powerful opponents. Hit that like button if you believe one person with courage can make a difference, and subscribe to hear more stories of everyday heroes fighting for justice. Now the question is, Do you think Deputy Martinez has made a dangerous mistake by confronting Chief Hargrove directly, or was this her moment of true courage? Elijah's strategic division campaign reached its culmination when he engineered a direct confrontation between the two officers who had initially targeted him. The mechanism was elegant in its simplicity, evidence suggesting Officer Miller had secretly recorded their extortion operations as insurance delivered anonymously to the increasingly unstable Reynolds. Surveillance captured the violent altercation that followed, Reynolds confronting Miller in the police station, parking lot accusations, escalating to shoves, then blows, fellow officers scrambling to separate them. The public spectacle shattered any remaining illusion of department unity. "The house of cards is collapsing," Elijah observed, as they reviewed footage of the chief trying to restore order among his increasingly fractious officers. "They're turning on each other exactly as predicted." The intelligence wall in their operations room now documented a department in disarray, officers requesting transfers, internal affairs investigations launched and then mysteriously closed, the chief holding meetings in cars and restaurants rather than his office. Most significantly, victims of the corruption were finding courage, connecting with each other, organizing their testimonies. Amara Johnson released when the evidence against her proved too flimsy, even for Hargrove's corrupted system, had become a rallying point, discreetly gathering other victims into a potential class action. With each passing day, the unified corruption that had once seemed invincible continued fragmenting into individual actors focused on self-preservation. The chief, who had built his power on fear and cohesion, was losing both. His control was slipping, and with it his ability to prevent the inevitable collapse. Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington, who had dismantled insurgent networks across 3 continents, recognized the familiar pattern of a system in terminal decline. The corrupt officers had targeted him, believing he was an easy victim. Instead, they had set in motion their own destruction at the hands of a master strategist who had spent his career dismantling more dangerous organizations than theirs. As Elijah prepared the final phase of his operation, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction. Justice was approaching with the inexorable force of a tidal wave, and not even the most corrupt system in Bayou Ridge could stand against it. Chief Victor Hargrove's financial records arrived in a plain manila envelope at the Internal Revenue Service field office, 200 miles away. The anonymous package contained meticulously documented discrepancies between the chief's declared income and his actual expenditures. The lakeside vacation home, the offshore accounts, the shell companies purchasing commercial properties throughout the county. The evidence was comprehensive, organized with professional precision, and utterly damning. Within 48 hours, federal financial investigators had opened a preliminary inquiry. Elijah's strategic strike against Hargrove's finances represented the opening of the final phase, attacking the corruption's foundation rather than its symptoms. "Always follow the money," he told Darius, as they monitored communications indicating federal interest. "Corrupt officials can explain away abuse of power. They can dismiss accusations from marginalized communities. But they can never justify unexplained wealth." The chief's response was swift and desperate. Security footage from the police department obtained through Martinez's increasingly bold cooperation showed Hargrove ordering the destruction of financial records, the shredding of evidence, the wiping of hard drives. Each panicked action further incriminated him while destroying the very documentation that might have provided some defense. "He's making every mistake in the book," Darius observed with professional satisfaction. Classic target behavior when pressure exceeds capability. Elijah nodded grimly. "And now, he'll make the most predictable mistake of all. He'll try to eliminate witnesses. The protection network for key witnesses was already in place." Amara Johnson and other vocal victims were moved to secure locations outside Hargrove's jurisdiction. Digital evidence was backed up across multiple secure servers. Martinez was given emergency extraction protocols if her cover was compromised. Most deliberately, Elijah positioned himself as an apparent, easy target, maintaining predictable patterns while secretly preparing for the inevitable attempt against him. It came on a rainy Thursday night. 3 unmarked vehicles converging on his motel. 6 men in plainclothes but moving with the unmistakable coordination of law enforcement. Elijah observed their approach through specialized equipment cataloging weapons, identifying each officer despite the poor visibility. 2 he recognized from his original traffic stop. The others were from Hargrove's inner circle, officers who rarely made arrests but frequently participated in special operations. "They're not here to arrest me," Elijah commented to Darius through their encrypted communication link. "This is a permanent solution team." Darius, positioned 200 yards away with night vision equipment, confirmed the assessment. "No body cameras, no marked vehicles. This is off the books." "Perfect," Elijah replied, activating the final elements of their trap. The motel room was empty when the officers breached the door, but the sophisticated recording equipment captured everything: their explicit discussions of eliminating the problem, their coordination with the chief via unsecured phones, their discovery of documents Elijah had deliberately left describing an apparent meeting with federal prosecutors scheduled for the following day. Their panic was immediate and complete. For 30 minutes they searched the room, made increasingly frantic calls, and most importantly, incriminated themselves beyond any possibility of defense. When Officer Thomas Cole, the youngest and most visibly uncomfortable member of the team, stepped outside for air, Elijah was waiting. The conversation that followed was brief, direct, and transformative. Cole learned exactly who Elijah Washington truly was. Not just a retired military officer, but the legendary commander whose operations against corrupt systems were studied at the FBI Academy in Quantico. He saw selected evidence of the comprehensive case built against the department. Most significantly, he was offered the one thing a man in his position most desperately needed: a way out. "First one to cooperate gets the best deal," Elijah explained calmly. "Everyone else gets buried under the evidence. Your choice, but make it now." Officer Cole made his decision before the rain had soaked through his jacket. Meanwhile, Deputy Martinez was securing the internal documentation that would prove essential to any prosecution: personnel files, complaint records, systematically buried financial transactions disguised as legitimate police operations. The risk she took was enormous, but so was her determination to redeem herself and her profession. "I became a cop to help people," she told Elijah during their secured meeting, "not to terrorize them." The following morning, Elijah initiated the final coordination with federal authorities. His military contacts had finally penetrated the bureaucratic defenses, connecting him with senior Justice Department officials beyond the reach of Hargrove's influence. The evidence was transferred through secure channels, the testimonies organized, and verified, the financial documentation structured for maximum legal impact. State police investigators, operating under judicial authorization from outside Hargrove's corrupted district, began parallel inquiries. The trap was set, tested, and ready. All that remained was to spring it. The confrontation with Officer Reynolds came first, a calculated encounter at a public restaurant where the corrupt officer couldn't employ his usual tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington. Elijah introduced himself, formally extending credentials Reynolds had never seen during their original encounter. "Special Operations Command retired. We have unfinished business." The blood drained from Reynolds' face as recognition dawned, not just of Elijah, but of the magnitude of his mistake in targeting him. 30 years dismantling corrupt systems across 4 continents, Elijah continued conversationally. Terrorist networks, drug cartels, human trafficking operations, organizations with armies and territories. Organizations that made your little extortion racket look like a child's game. He slid a file across the table, containing selected evidence of Reynolds' crimes, his connections to broader corruption, and most devastatingly proof that the chief was preparing to sacrifice him to save the wider operation. "You have one chance," Elijah concluded. "Cooperate. Fully testify completely, or go down with a system that's already abandoned you." Reynolds' breakdown was complete and immediate. Within hours, he was providing sworn testimony to state investigators, detailing operations, naming names, confirming the organizational structure Elijah had already mapped with military precision. The final pieces were in place. The trap that had been meticulously constructed over weeks was now ready to close around Chief Victor Hargrove and the corrupt system he commanded. and Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington, the master strategist they had foolishly targeted as an easy victim, prepared to deliver the justice they had never anticipated when they pulled over a black driver on a lonely Louisiana highway. The federal agents arrived at dawn, a coordinated operation involving multiple agencies. Black SUVs with tinted windows converged on the Bayou Ridge Police Department from different directions, creating a perimeter that allowed no possibility of escape. Inside his office, Chief Victor Hargrove watched the deployment through his window, the blood draining from his face as he recognized the tactical formation. This wasn't a routine visit. This was an operation. His phone rang, Deputy Martinez from the front desk. "Chief, there are federal agents here with warrants, a lot of them." Her voice betrayed no emotion, giving no indication she had helped orchestrate this moment. Hargrove's mind raced, calculating options, escape routes, contingencies. He had weathered investigations before, had connections in federal agencies, had always managed to deflect or delay justice. But something about this felt different. The precision, the scale, the timing. "Tell them I'm in a meeting," he ordered already, moving to his private bathroom where a go-bag with cash identification and emergency supplies was hidden behind a ventilation panel. "Stall them." But there would be no escape. The bathroom door opened before he reached it, revealing two federal agents who had entered through his office's back entrance, a vulnerability in his security that someone with intimate knowledge of the building must have identified. Chief Victor Hargrove, the lead agent, announced formally, "We have federal warrants for financial crimes, civil rights violations, and corruption under color of authority." As the chief was escorted through his own department in handcuffs, officers watched with expressions ranging from shock to vindication. Some turned away, avoiding his gaze. Others straightened as if weights had been lifted from their shoulders. Outside news. Crews were already assembling, alerted by anonymous tips about a major federal operation targeting police corruption. The cameras captured the once untouchable chief being placed in a federal vehicle, his expression a mask of contained fury. At the county courthouse, similar scenes unfolded as Judge Harrison and Prosecutor Williams were taken into custody by separate federal teams. The synchronized arrests prevented any opportunity for evidence destruction or coordinated defense. Across town, Officer Reynolds waited in an interview room, continuing his extensive cooperation in exchange for consideration in sentencing. One by one, the corrupt officers Elijah had identified were located and detained. Some surrendered without resistance, recognizing the inevitable. Others attempted to flee only to find every escape route anticipated and blocked. The system that had terrorized minorities and protected itself for years was being dismantled with surgical precision. From a hotel room 20 miles away, Elijah and Darius monitored the operation through secure communications with their federal contacts. 5 years in Eastern Europe, 3 in Southeast Asia, and the most satisfying takedown happens right here in Louisiana, Darius commented, watching live news coverage of the arrests. Elijah nodded, his expression resolute rather than triumphant. The job's not done until the victims get justice. That justice began materializing faster than anyone anticipated. As news of the arrests spread, victims of the corruption began coming forward, not just dozens but hundreds. People who had been extorted, falsely imprisoned, or terrorized by the corrupt system found courage in seeing their oppressors in handcuffs. Local attorneys, previously intimidated into silence, offered pro bono representation for civil rights claims. State officials, embarrassed by the federal intervention, established emergency reviews of convictions connected to the corrupt officers. Amara Johnson emerged as a natural leader, organizing victims, coordinating testimonies, ensuring no voice went unheard. The media narrative quickly solidified around the comprehensive nature of the corruption and the systematic targeting of minorities. But as public attention focused on the arrests, questions inevitably arose about who had orchestrated the investigation. Federal officials remained deliberately vague, citing ongoing operations. Theories multiplied: an FBI sting, an internal affairs investigation gone public, a whistleblower from within the department. Few suspected the quiet black veteran who had appeared in town weeks earlier and was now preparing for the most direct confrontation of all. Chief Hargrove, detained pending arraignment, requested a meeting with the federal prosecutor handling his case. Instead, he found himself face-to-face with Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington. "You," Hargrove whispered, recognition and rage mingling in his expression. "It was you all along." Elijah sat calmly across the table, his posture relaxed but alert. "You should have checked my background more thoroughly before you decided to target me," he said quietly. 30 years dismantling corrupt systems more sophisticated than yours. Warlords with private armies. Dictators with death squads. Did you really think a small-town police chief with delusions of untouchability would present a challenge? Hargrove leaned forward, desperation replacing his usual confidence. "I have connections you can't imagine. People who can make problems disappear. Even this one." "Had connections," Elijah corrected. Past tense. "Your political protectors abandoned you the moment the financial crimes evidence went public. Your law enforcement allies are distancing themselves as we speak. Your offshore accounts have been frozen by international cooperation agreements I helped establish years ago." He opened a folder displaying comprehensive documentation of Hargrove's criminal enterprise, organizational charts, financial flows, communication records. "This isn't an investigation, Chief. This is a complete dismantling." Hargrove's face contorted with hatred. "You think this changes anything? The system always protects its own. I'll be back on the street in months, and people like you will still be getting pulled over for driving while black." Elijah allowed himself a small smile. "That's where you're wrong. Your case isn't being handled by local prosecutors or even regional federal attorneys. It's been elevated to the Civil Rights Division of the Justice Department as a model case of systematic corruption targeting minorities." He closed the folder. "You're facing federal charges with mandatory minimums that ensure you'll never wear a badge again. Your entire criminal network has been mapped and is being prosecuted. The victims you've created over years are organized, represented, and coming for justice." For the first time, genuine fear showed in Hargrove's eyes as he realized the true scope of his situation. His control was gone. His power was broken. His future was now in the hands of a system he had abused for years. As federal agents returned to escort Hargrove back to his cell, the chief made one final desperate lunge across the table. With the speed and precision that had made him legendary in combat operations, Elijah neutralized the attack with minimal force, restraining Hargrove until agents secured him. "That's assault on a federal witness," Elijah noted calmly as Hargrove was restrained. "Add it to the charges." Outside the detention center, news crews captured footage of Elijah emerging, his composed demeanor, a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding the case. Within hours, his identity and role began emerging in media reports. The decorated commander who had been racially profiled and responded by dismantling an entire corrupt system. As more victims came forward and more evidence became public, the scale of justice being delivered to Bayou Ridge expanded beyond what anyone had initially imagined. The systematic racism and corruption that had terrorized minorities for years was not just being punished, it was being exposed to national attention, creating momentum for broader reforms. And at the center of it all stood Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington, the man. These corrupt officers had mistaken for an easy target, never imagining he would become the architect of their destruction and the catalyst for a justice, too long denied. 6 months after the arrest that shook Bayou Ridge to its foundations, Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington took the witness stand in the federal courthouse. The gallery was packed with journalists, legal observers, and most importantly, victims of the corrupt system now facing justice. Chief Hargrove and his co-defendants sat at the defense table, their once imposing presence diminished by prison jumpsuits and the weight of overwhelming evidence. For 3 hours, Elijah testified with military precision, laying out the systematic racism and corruption he had documented. His testimony, supported by exhaustive evidence gathered through his operation, left no room for doubt or deflection. When the defense attorney attempted to portray Elijah as an vigilante with a personal vendetta, his calm response silenced the courtroom. "I've spent 30 years defending American values against enemies, foreign and domestic," he stated. The officers who targeted me because of my race weren't just committing crimes against individuals. They were betraying the constitutional principles they swore to uphold. The damage they've done to public trust and to the rule of law made them a domestic threat as serious as any I faced overseas. The verdicts, when they came, were comprehensive. Hargrove received 25 years on combined charges of racketeering, civil rights violations, extortion, and financial crimes. Judge Harrison and Prosecutor Williams received 15 years each for their roles in perpetuating the corrupt system. The officers received sentences varying based on their crimes and level of cooperation, with Reynolds facing 12 years, despite his eventual assistance. Beyond the criminal proceedings, the impact rippled outward. Over 40 people wrongfully imprisoned through the corrupt system were released and provided restitution. Civil rights lawsuits resulted in a $60 million settlement fund for victims of racial profiling and extortion. The Bayou Ridge Police Department was placed under federal consent decree, with reforms touching every aspect of operations from training to oversight. Perhaps most significantly, Elijah established the Justice Restoration Foundation using his military pension and a portion of the settlement funds awarded to him personally. The foundation provided legal support for victims of racial profiling nationwide, with Amara Johnson serving as its executive director. What happened in Bayou Ridge wasn't unique, Amara explained at the foundation's launch. What was unique was having someone with Lieutenant Colonel Washington's skills and determination to fight back. Our goal is to provide that same level of advocacy for communities without a champion of their own. The foundation quickly expanded, establishing offices in 5 states and partnering with law schools to review potential wrongful convictions resulting from racial bias in policing. For Elijah, the work brought purpose to his retirement that military consulting never had. My wife always believed that the skills I developed protecting our nation abroad should ultimately serve justice at home, he explained during a rare television interview. When those officers profiled me because of my race, they inadvertently gave me the opportunity to fulfill that vision. His public profile brought risks. Threats came from former officers, from sympathizers of the corrupt system, from those who resented his exposure of systemic racism. Elijah handled these with the same tactical awareness that had kept him alive through decades of military operations, neither intimidated nor distracted from his mission. 3 months after the conclusion of the federal trial, Elijah received an unexpected call from the Attorney General's office. The Department of Justice was establishing a specialized task force focused on identifying and prosecuting patterns of racial discrimination in law enforcement nationwide. They wanted him to lead it. Your operation in Bayou Ridge demonstrated precisely the skills we need, the Attorney General explained. The ability to recognize systemic problems, gather actionable evidence, and dismantle corrupt structures while preserving legitimate law enforcement functions. The offer represented an unprecedented opportunity to address at a national level the injustices Elijah had confronted in Louisiana. After careful consideration, he accepted, bringing with him a team that included Darius Deputy Martinez and legal experts who had supported his foundation's work. 1 year after being pulled over because of his race on a lonely highway, Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington stood before the first graduating class of task force investigators, a diverse group of former military law enforcement and civil rights attorneys united by commitment to constitutional principles and equal justice. What we're doing isn't anti-police, he explained to them. It's pro-justice. Every corrupt officer who targets citizens based on race doesn't just harm those individuals. They poison the relationship between communities and the law enforcement agencies meant to protect them. They make good officers' jobs harder and more dangerous. They undermine the foundation of trust essential to effective policing. The task force's work quickly produced results, identifying patterns of discrimination across jurisdictions and creating accountability where internal systems had failed. Most importantly, it established clear standards and consequences that served both as deterrent and guide for departments nationwide. On the 2nd anniversary of his traffic stop in Bayou Ridge, Elijah returned to the scene. The highway looked the same, but everything else had transformed. The police department operated under new leadership with transparent oversight. Former victims served on community advisory boards. Training programs Elijah had helped design were being implemented not just locally, but in departments across the state. Standing where officers had once targeted him because of his race, Elijah reflected on the unexpected journey. What those corrupt officers never understood when they saw a black driver they thought they could victimize was that they weren't encountering an easy target. They were facing a man whose entire career had prepared him to recognize, document, and dismantle corruption with surgical precision. Their mistake hadn't just led to their own downfall. It had catalyzed reforms that would protect countless others from similar injustice. The final revelation came during prosecution discovery. Documents showing that before Elijah ever entered Bayou Ridge, he had already been researching patterns of police corruption nationwide. His wife's death years earlier had connections to similar corruption in another jurisdiction, giving his mission personal significance beyond professional duty. The traffic stop that corrupt officers had intended as routine exploitation had in fact intersected with a man already committed to addressing the very injustice they represented. Their racial profiling meant to victimize had instead empowered the ideal adversary to dismantle their entire system. In targeting Elijah Washington because of his race, they had unwittingly become the architects of their own destruction and the catalyst for reforms that would long outlast their corrupt regime. What's your take on this story? Do you believe one person with the right skills and determination can truly change a corrupt system? Comment below with your thoughts. If this story of justice against all odds inspired you, please hit the like button. It helps more people find these important stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives about overcoming injustice, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that change is possible. Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and found the courage to stand against it? Your story matters too. The story of Lieutenant Colonel Elijah Washington reveals powerful truths about justice and systemic change. First, corrupt systems aren't invincible. They have vulnerabilities that strategic thinking can exploit. When facing institutional racism, methodical documentation and evidence gathering prove more effective than emotional reactions. Washington's military approach: observe, identify weaknesses, create division, then strike decisively demonstrates how specialized skills can be repurposed to fight injustice. The story teaches us that sometimes those who abuse power target the very people capable of dismantling their systems. True change requires addressing both individual bad actors and the structures enabling them. Washington didn't stop at personal vindication, but worked to rebuild the system fairly from the ground up. Most importantly, this narrative shows how underestimating people based on race can lead oppressors to their downfall. By targeting Washington because he was black, the corrupt officers unwittingly selected an adversary uniquely qualified to expose their crimes. The lesson is clear. Systematic racism isn't just morally wrong, it's also a strategic miscalculation that can ultimately backfire against those who perpetuate it. Have you ever witnessed injustice and wondered if one person could really make a difference? This story shows that courage, strategy, and persistence can overcome even deeply entrenched corruption. What would you do if faced with discrimination like Elijah experienced? Would you have his patience and discipline to fight back systematically? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of justice against racism inspired you, smash that like button to help others find it. Subscribe for more powerful true stories about extraordinary people standing up against impossible odds. And please share this video with someone who needs to hear that systemic change is possible. Sometimes it just takes the right person being underestimated. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the fight for justice, knowledge and strategy are the most powerful weapons. Until next time, stay strong and keep fighting for what's right.